The bridge of the UES Meridian fell silent as the impossible transmission crackled through their quantum communicators. Static-laden and distorted, the voice that emerged from the speakers made Admiral Kalen Voss's blood run cold. "This is Admiral Drakthar Nemeth aboard the UES Shadowmaw, requesting immediate docking clearance at Sol Station." "That's impossible," whispered Communications Officer Lyris Thorne, her fingers trembling over the console. "Nemeth died at the Battle of Kepler's Gate 7 years ago. The Shadowmaw was vaporized by Vex-Thali plasma cannons." Voss stared at the tactical display, where a ship signature unlike anything in their databases slowly materialized from hyperspace. The vessel was massive, easily 3 times the size of their largest dreadnought, but its hull appeared to be a patchwork of human and alien technologies fused together in ways that defied conventional engineering. "Sir," called out sensor technician Rex Caldris, "I'm reading energy signatures that they don't match any known power source. The hull composition is showing traces of Vexithali biosteel, chronite quantum mesh, and something else entirely. Something that's not in our databases." The war against the Vexithali collective had raged for 15 years, pushing humanity to the brink of extinction. Their enemies were a coalition of 12 alien species, each more advanced than Earth's defenders. Humanity's only advantage had been their unpredictability and stubborn refusal to surrender. But even that was wearing thin. 3 core worlds had already fallen, and Earth itself was under constant siege. Drakthar Nemeth had been humanity's greatest tactical mind, the architect of their few victories against impossible odds. His supposed death at Kepler's Gate had marked the beginning of humanity's darkest hour. The official report stated that his experimental vessel, the Shadowmaw, had been caught in a quantum cascade failure during a desperate flanking maneuver against a Vex-Thali fortress world. "Admiral," Thorne's voice cut through his thoughts, "the ship is requesting permission to dock. The voice pattern analysis, sir, it's a 97% match for Admiral Nemeth." Voss felt the weight of command pressing down on him. If this was some kind of Vex-Thali trick, allowing the vessel to dock could compromise Sol Station and the entire home defense fleet. But if it truly was Nemeth, "Patch me through," Voss commanded. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a figure that made the bridge crew gasp in unison. It was unmistakably Drakthar Nemeth, but changed. His left eye had been replaced with what appeared to be a cybernetic implant that pulsed with an eerie blue light. Scars crisscrossed his face in patterns that seemed almost ritualistic, and when he spoke, his voice carried an undertone that hadn't been there before, something that suggested he had seen things beyond human comprehension. "Hello, Kalen," Nemeth said, a ghost of his old smile playing at his lips. "I know this is unexpected, but I bring gifts from the deep dark between the stars, gifts that will end this war." Behind him, the bridge of the Shadowmaw was visible, a nightmarish fusion of human engineering and alien biotechnology. Crew members moved with mechanical precision, and Voss noticed with growing unease that many bore similar modifications to their admiral. "Drakthar," Voss said carefully, "where have you been? What happened at Kepler's Gate?" Nemeth's modified eye flared brighter. "I died, Kalen. We all died. But death, as it turns out, was merely the beginning of our education. The Vex-Thali aren't our only enemies out here. There are things in the void between galaxies that make our current war look like a playground dispute. And they're coming." The transmission cut to static for a moment before Nemeth's voice returned, now carrying an edge of urgency. "I need to speak with the Defense Council immediately. Every moment we delay, more human worlds burn. And trust me when I say, we're going to need every advantage we can get." The emergency session of the Terran Defense Council convened in the deepest levels of Sol Station, behind quantum-encrypted barriers that could withstand planet-killer weapons. The 7 remaining council members sat in a semicircle, their faces grim as they studied the classified reports spread before them. Admiral Nemeth stood at the center of the chamber, flanked by 2 of his crew members. The modifications were even more disturbing in person. Lieutenant Commander Zephyr Korath's entire left arm had been replaced with what appeared to be living metal that shifted and flowed like mercury, while Chief Engineer Valdris Nexor bore cranial implants that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Counselor Uriel Vane, the eldest member and de facto leader since the fall of New Geneva, leaned forward. Admiral Nemeth, your return raises more questions than it answers. Our forensics teams analyzed the debris from Kepler's gate. DNA samples confirmed your death. You found what we left behind, Nemeth replied, his cybernetic eye casting an eerie glow across the chamber. Bodies have a way of becoming expendable when you discover what lies beyond the veil of conventional reality. He gestured, and the chamber's holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of known space. Red markers indicated Vexathali-controlled territories, while blue showed humanity's dwindling holdings. But Nemeth added new markers, dark purple dots that formed a rough sphere encompassing both human and Vexathali space. The Vexathali aren't the apex predators they believe themselves to be, Nemeth continued. They're running, fleeing from something they call the Silence, entities from the spaces between realities that consume not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself. Counselor Mira Deathcon shifted uncomfortably. You're talking about theoretical physics as if it were fact. The spaces between realities are very real, Nexor interrupted, her voice carrying strange harmonics. We've been there. We've seen the feeding grounds where entire civilizations are unraveled at the quantum level, their histories erased so completely that they never existed at all. Nemeth nodded. The Vexathali collective formed not for conquest, but for survival. They need our space, our resources, because they're preparing for a war that makes our current conflict look trivial. Unfortunately, they've chosen the wrong approach. And you're suggesting alliance? Vane asked, disbelief evident in his voice. I'm suggesting evolution, Nemeth replied. The technologies my crew and I discovered in the deep void, they're not just weapons. They're transformative, but they require sacrifices. He gestured again, and the display showed the Shadow Maw in detail. The ship was a fusion of technologies. That shouldn't be possible. Human engineering merged with Vexathali biotech, but overlaid with something else entirely. Structures that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Conduits that carried energy forms unknown to conventional physics. The Silence feeds on stagnation, Korath explained, his metallic arm forming complex geometric patterns as he spoke. Species that remain locked in their original forms, their original thinking patterns. They're essentially cosmic food. But entities that embrace change, that merge with technologies beyond their understanding, we become indigestible. Counselor Yarek Stormwind, humanity's chief military strategist, studied the schematics with growing fascination and horror. The power requirements alone should tear your ship apart. How are you maintaining structural integrity? We're not, Nemeth said simply. The Shadow Maw exists in a state of controlled collapse, held together by technologies that rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in localized space-time bubbles. Every day we don't die is a victory. The chamber fell silent, as the implications sank in. Finally, Vane spoke. What are you proposing, Admiral? Nemeth's human eye met the counselor's gaze while his cybernetic implant pulsed brighter. Total war, not just against the Vexathali, but against the Silence itself. We take their technologies, we merge them with our own, and we transform humanity into something that can fight cosmic predators on their own terms. And if we refuse, then in 6 months, when the Silence arrives in full force, both humanity and the Vexathali will be erased from existence so completely that the universe will never remember we were here. Nemeth's scarred face showed no emotion. The choice, as always, is simple. Evolve or die. Outside the council chamber, alarms began to blare. The Vexathali were launching another assault on the outer colonies, and time was running out for both species. The first joint human Vexathali meeting in the history of both species took place aboard a neutral research station in the disputed Helios sector. Admiral Nemeth stood across from War Master Kethvar, the Vexthali's supreme military commander, while their respective fleets maintained weapons locks on each other just outside the station's protective shields. HFY was an imposing figure, even by Vexthali standards, 9 feet tall with chitinous armor that seemed to grow directly from his exoskeleton. His 4 arms moved in complex patterns as he spoke, each gesture carrying meaning in the Vexthali's complex body language protocol. Your species speaks of alliance while your fleets burn our colonies. HFY chittered, his translator rendering the sounds into harsh mechanical words. Why should the collective trust the desperate promises of dead humans? Nemeth's cybernetic eye flared as he accessed data streams invisible to normal human perception. Around them, the station's atmospheric processors hummed with tension, as both delegations tried to maintain diplomatic protocols while preparing for potential violence. Because, Nemeth said, I've seen what's coming for both our species. Your own deep space monitoring stations have detected the gravitational anomalies. Reality distortions that shouldn't exist according to any known physics. The Vexthali War Master's mandibles clicked in what might have been surprise or anger. Behind him, biotech coordinator Rexthane, a smaller, more cerebral member of the collective, leaned forward with evident interest. The humans speak of the silence, Rexthane said, her voice carrying harmonic overtones that human ears couldn't fully process. Our seers have felt the cold between worlds, the places where space itself grows empty. Nemeth nodded and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The image showed the galaxy from an impossible perspective, not just the 3 dimensions of normal space, but layers of reality stacked upon each other, like sheets of cosmic tissue paper. 7 years ago, my ship was pulled into one of these dimensional tiers, he explained. We spent subjective months in a realm where physics operates according to different rules. We weren't alone there. The display shifted, showing massive structures that hurt to look at directly. Geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the human or Vexthali mind could properly process. Around these structures, the scattered remains of countless civilizations floated like debris in an impossible ocean. The silence isn't a single entity, Nexor added, her cranial implants pulsing as she interfaced directly with the display system. It's a collective intelligence made up of the consumed consciousness of every species it has devoured. Billions of civilizations all merged into a singular hunger that feeds on the very concept of existence. HFY's 4 arms moved in rapid, agitated patterns. Our prophecies speak of the Void Walkers, ancient enemies that consumed the progenitor races, but those are myths, stories told to younglings. Myths with teeth, Korath said, his metallic arm reshaping itself into a complex scanning device. The technologies we found drifting in that dimensional space, they're not from any single species. They're fusion constructs, the surviving fragments of every civilization the silence has consumed. Rexthane approached the display, her biosensory organs extending to analyze the data directly. The energy signatures, they match theoretical models for dark matter manipulation. But the power requirements would be astronomical, which is why they need feeding grounds, Nemeth explained. Entire regions of spacetime where they can process matter and energy into forms they can consume. The Milky Way galaxy is designated as their next harvesting zone. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle harmonics of the station's life support systems. Both species were processing implications that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. Finally, HFY spoke. What do the humans propose? Nemeth smiled, but it wasn't an expression that carried warmth. Complete integration. Human adaptability merged with Vexthali biotechnology, enhanced by the exotic technologies we salvaged from the dimensional breach. We become something new, something the silence can't easily digest. You speak of abomination, one of the Vexthali delegates chittered. I speak of survival, Nemeth replied. Evolution has always been about becoming something other than what you were. The question is whether both our species are willing to sacrifice their purity for a chance at existence. HFY's mandibles clicked in a pattern that human scholars had identified as deep contemplation. Show us these technologies in action. Prove that your path leads to victory, not extinction. Nemeth's cybernetic eye pulsed brighter. Very well. But understand, once you see what we've become, there's no going back. The transformation is irreversible. In the depths of space beyond the station, the Shadow Maw began to change, its hull flowing like liquid metal as it prepared to demonstrate capabilities that would redefine both species' understanding of what was possible. The joint human Vexthali fleet hung in space around the contested world of Zarian Prime, watching in stunned silence as the Shadow Maw began its demonstration. What they witnessed challenged every fundamental assumption about physics, biology, and the nature of reality itself. The massive vessel started to unfold, its hull segments separated and reconfigured, but not in the mechanical way of traditional human engineering or even the organic flow of Vexthali biotech. Instead, sections of the ship seemed to phase in and out of visible reality, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "By the eternal swarm," whispered Kethvar, his four arms moving in patterns of awe and horror. "The vessel exists in folded space-time." Admiral Nemeth's voice crackled through the communications array, carrying strange harmonics that seemed to bypass the translators entirely. "The modifications aren't just technological, they're ontological. We've altered the fundamental nature of our existence to operate in multiple reality layers simultaneously." On the view screen, crew members aboard the Shadow Maw could be seen moving through corridors that extended far beyond the ship's external dimensions. They walked on walls that became floors, passed through barriers that existed only in normal space-time, and operated controls that responded to thought as much as touch. Chief Medical Officer Pyrrhus Cavell, aboard the Vexthali flagship Nest of Thorns, monitored the biological readings with growing alarm. The human life signs, they're not following standard metabolic patterns. Their quantum signatures are fluctuating in ways that should be fatal. "Death is a luxury we can no longer afford," came Nexor's voice from the Shadow Maw. "We exist in a state of controlled quantum superposition, alive and dead simultaneously, until observation collapses the wave function in our favor." The demonstration took a more dramatic turn, as the Shadow Maw engaged a cluster of automated defense platforms left behind by the planet's original inhabitants. But instead of firing conventional weapons, the ship seemed to erase the platforms from existence. "The weapons don't destroy matter," Korath explained. "They unweave the quantum probability matrices that allow matter to exist in this dimension. The targets aren't destroyed. They never were." Biotech Coordinator Rexthane analyzed the data streams with growing fascination. "The energy manipulation patterns, they're similar to our own biointegration techniques, but operating on quantum rather than cellular levels." Admiral Voss, monitoring from Sol Station, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the recycled air. "Drakthar, what have you become?" Nemeth's scarred face appeared on the view screen, his cybernetic eye now clearly visible as a gateway to something vast and incomprehensible. "We've become what we needed to become. The question is whether the rest of humanity, and our new Vexthali allies, are willing to follow." The demonstration continued as the Shadow Maw interfaced with the planetary surface itself. Tendrils of living metal extended from the ship, burrowing deep into Zarian Prime's crust. Within hours, massive structures began to emerge, not built but grown from the planet's own material, reshaped at the atomic level into forms that served purposes beyond conventional understanding. "Planetary integration," Nemeth explained. "Any world we transform becomes part of our defensive network. The planet itself becomes aware, capable of defending against dimensional incursions." Kethvar's mandibles clicked in rapid patterns as he consulted with his advisors. The Vexthali had always prided themselves on their biotechnological superiority, but what they were witnessing transcended biology entirely. "The collective's biosynthesis protocols could be adapted to your dimensional manipulation techniques," Rexthane said finally. "Our reproductive systems could birth hybrid entities capable of existing in multiple reality states. The process isn't without cost, warned Dr. Lysander Cross, the Shadowmaw's chief science officer, whose own modifications were so extensive that only his voice identified him as human. Psychological fragmentation is common. Many of our crew exist as distributed consciousness networks rather than individual minds. But the alternative is extinction, Nemeth said. Not just death. Complete erasure from the quantum foam that underlies reality. The silence doesn't just kill civilizations, it makes them unhappen. As if summoned by his words, the deep space monitoring stations began detecting massive gravitational anomalies at the galaxy's edge. The readings showed distortions in space-time that defied analysis, regions where the laws of physics simply stopped functioning. "They're coming," Nemeth said, his human and cybernetic eyes focusing on something beyond the visible spectrum. "The advanced scouts of the silence. We have perhaps 6 months before the main force arrives." Kethvar stood to his full imposing height, his 4 arms moving in the formal patterns of military accord. "The collective will join this transformation. Better to become something incomprehensible than to cease existing entirely." Admiral Voss's voice crackled through the comm array, carrying the weight of humanity's final decision. "Soul Command authorizes full integration protocols. God help us all." In the depths of space, reality itself began to change as 2 ancient enemies prepared to become something unprecedented in the galaxy's history. The transformation chambers. Aboard the Shadowmaw hummed with energies that existed outside conventional physics. Volunteer crews from both human and Vex-Thali fleets underwent the integration process, a procedure that was part surgery, part ritual, and part violation of natural law. Captain Zendra Vale of the UES Defiant lay on the biomechanical interface, her body connected to systems that pulsed with their own alien intelligence. Beside her, Vex-Thali warrior Prime Kethax underwent parallel modifications, his chitinous armor being fused with quantum resonance crystals that would allow him to perceive multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. "The pain is educational," Kethax chittered, his translator struggling with concepts that had no equivalent in either human or Vex-Thali languages. "I begin to understand why existence itself fights against this transformation." Dr. Cross monitored the procedures from UAM, a control booth that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. His distributed consciousness could perceive the quantum-level changes occurring in both subjects, DNA and genetic matrices being rewritten not just biologically, but conceptually. "The integration is proceeding within acceptable parameters," he reported. "Captain Vale's neural pathways are adapting to quantum superposition states. Warrior Prime Kethax's exoskeleton is incorporating dimensional phase materials successfully." Throughout the combined fleet, similar transformations were taking place. Engineers learned to work with tools that existed in multiple realities at once. Pilots trained to navigate ships through folded space-time. Soldiers practiced with weapons that could target enemies across dimensional barriers. But the most significant changes were happening to the ships themselves. The UES Meridian screamed as its hull was penetrated by living metal conduits from the Vex-Thali bioship Chrysalis of war. The fusion wasn't gentle. It was a violent merger of technologies that had never been meant to coexist. Yet under the guidance of Nemeth's transformed engineers, something unprecedented began to emerge. "The vessel designation will be Synthesis," announced Navigator Prime Irixtal, whose modifications allowed her to perceive the ship's true form across multiple dimensional layers. Neither human nor Vex-Thali, but something entirely new. The Synthesis was just the first. Across the fleet, human and Vex-Thali vessels were being merged into hybrid entities that defied classification. Their hulls flowed like living tissue, while incorporating quantum mechanical components that existed in states of controlled collapse. Their weapon systems fired coherent possibility waves that could rewrite the fundamental nature of whatever they targeted. Admiral Nemeth stood on the bridge of the Shadowmaw, watching through his cybernetic eye as reality restructured itself around their growing fleet. His human consciousness existed alongside vast artificial intelligences that had been constructed from the memories of consumed civilizations. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke directly to the quantum processing centers of his hybrid crew. 47 vessels successfully integrated, reported Commander Zara Nightfall, whose own transformation had left her existing as a distributed awareness throughout the ship's neural networks. Crew adaptation rates holding steady at 73% survival. And the planet? Xerion Prime's transformation is accelerating. The planetary consciousness has achieved basic awareness. Defensive capabilities coming online across 3 continental masses. Through the viewports, the planet below was barely recognizable. Its surface crawled with structures that grew from the living rock itself, vast geometric patterns that served as both infrastructure and weapon systems. The planet had become a fortress, but more than that, it had become aware. Kethvar approached, his 4 arms now enhanced with quantum manipulation capabilities that allowed him to interface directly with the ship's consciousness. "Our deep space monitors detect the Silence's advanced scouts. 7 systems have gone empty." Nemeth nodded grimly. "Not destroyed, erased. Every planet, every asteroid, every particle of dust, removed from the quantum probability matrix that defines existence." The strategic implications were staggering. The Silence didn't conquer territories. It deleted them from reality itself. Any conventional military response would be meaningless against enemies that could simply declare their opponents never existed. "How long until the main force arrives?" asked Dr. Cross, his distributed consciousness analyzing probability matrices across multiple dimensional layers. 4 months, 17 days, replied the ship's artificial intelligence, a hybrid entity born from human creativity and Vex-Thali biocomputational systems. "Assuming they maintain current consumption rates. Then we accelerate the transformation protocol," Nemeth decided. "Every human and Vex-Thali colony, every world, every station, everything must be integrated into the hybrid network before they arrive. The cost will be enormous," warned Rexthane, her biosensors already detecting the psychological strain on transformed crew members. "Many minds cannot adapt to multidimensional existence. The madness rates are approaching 30%. "Madness is better than non-existence," Nemeth replied. "At least the mad still exist to suffer." As if to underscore his point, the deep space monitors detected another system going dark. 8 billion Kaltheri, a neutral species that had refused all offers of alliance, simply ceased to be. Their home system still existed, but empty of all matter, all energy, all possibility of life. The transformation continued, racing against an enemy that consumed reality itself. The hybrid fleet gathered at the designated coordinates, a seemingly empty region of space that had once contained the Helix Nebula. Now it was a void, not of darkness, but of absolute nothingness. Even the quantum foam that underlay reality had been consumed, leaving a wound in existence itself. Admiral Nemeth stood on the bridge of the Shadow Maw, his consciousness distributed across 17 different dimensional layers simultaneously. Around him, his hybrid crew moved with the fluid precision of beings who existed in multiple states of reality at once. "Sensor readings," he commanded, though communication among the transformed had evolved beyond mere words. Concepts flowed directly between minds, carrying layers of meaning impossible to express in conventional language. Navigator Urixtal's response came as a cascade of multidimensional data. "The absence zone extends 47 light-years in all directions. Reality degradation continuing at 3.7% per standard day cycle. If the expansion rate holds constant, the effect will reach inhabited systems within 96 days. But it wasn't just the physical absence that disturbed the hybrid crews. Even looking at the void through their enhanced perception arrays, they could feel something watching them. Intelligences vast and alien and hungry, studying these new entities that dared to approach the feeding grounds. Captain Vale materialized on the bridge, her quantum-integrated form shifting between solid matter and probability waves. The transformation had been successful, but the cost was evident. Her human features were now interwoven with crystalline structures that pulsed with their own inner light. "The synthesis reports contact with silence scouts," she announced. 3 encounters in the past hour. They're testing us." The encounters had been brief but significant. Scout entities from the silence had approached the hybrid vessels, attempting to apply their reality deletion protocols. But instead of being erased from existence, the hybrid ships had simply refused to be deleted. Their multidimensional nature made them difficult targets for enemies that relied on quantum probability manipulation. "Fascinating," chittered Kethax, his transformed carapace now incorporating living metal that responded to his thoughts. "The silence constructs appear confused by our existence. We register as both real and unreal simultaneously." Dr. Cross's distributed consciousness provided analysis through the ship's neural networks. The enemy's deletion protocols work by collapsing quantum wave functions in their favor, but our hybrid nature means we exist in quantum superposition, states that can't be easily collapsed. We're genuinely uncertain whether we exist or not, which makes us immune to certainty-based attacks. It was a paradox that would have been impossible before the transformation. They had made themselves so fundamentally uncertain, so quantum mechanically ambiguous, that even cosmic predators couldn't decide whether they were real enough to consume. The strategic advantages were immediately apparent. Hybrid vessels could pass through silence interdiction fields without being detected, because the scanners couldn't determine if there was actually anything there to scan. Their weapons could target enemies across dimensional barriers, because the weapons themselves existed in probability states that encompassed multiple realities. But the true test came when the main silence fleet finally arrived. It wasn't a fleet in any conventional sense. What emerged from the void between galaxies was a collective entity of such vast scale that individual ships were meaningless. Structures the size of star systems moved with purpose and intelligence, their forms shifting between geometric impossibilities that existed in more dimensions than the mind could process. "Primary silence construct approaching," reported the hybrid sensor network. "Mass undefined, physical composition variable, estimated arrival at engagement coordinates in 17 minutes. Nemeth felt the familiar calm that came before. Decisive action. "Signal all vessels. Initiate reality anchor protocols. We're about to find out if evolution beats entropy." Across the hybrid fleet, ships began to change. Their quantum uncertain nature solidified into something more defined, or aggressive. Weapons that existed in probability states became focused instruments of multi-dimensional destruction. Defensive screens that operated across multiple reality layers activated, creating barriers that existed and didn't exist simultaneously. The transformation had been about more than survival. It had been about becoming something that could fight, the unfightable challenge entities that existed beyond conventional understanding of life and death. As the silence's main construct approached, reality itself began to break down around it. Space-time fractured, revealing glimpses of the consumed civilizations that made up its collective consciousness. Billions of species, all merged into a singular hunger that fed on existence itself. "All vessels," Nemeth commanded, his voice carrying across quantum communication networks that spanned multiple dimensions. "Remember what we were, remember what we chose to become, and remember what we're fighting for." The final battle was about to begin, not for territory or resources, but for the right to exist at all. The battle that followed existed in more dimensions than any single mind could comprehend. Ships fought across multiple reality layers simultaneously, their weapons targeting enemies that might or might not exist in any given moment. The laws of physics became suggestions, causality became optional, and the very concept of victory had to be redefined. The silence's primary construct, an entity that existed as much as concept as physical form, unleashed reality deletion waves that should have erased the hybrid fleet from existence. But the transformed vessels responded with their own quantum uncertainty, existing in superposition states that made them immune to certainty-based attacks. "Direct hit on the synthesis," reported navigator Erikstal. "Vessel status, undefined." She's simultaneously destroyed and intact until observation collapses the quantum state. Captain Vale's voice crackled through the multidimensional communication network. "We're fine. We're also completely vaporized. It's surprisingly liberating." The paradox of their existence had become their greatest weapon. The silence fed on certainty, on the solid reality of existence that could be consumed and processed, but entities that existed in quantum uncertainty were indigestible. They were too ambiguous to consume, too probability-based to delete. Admiral Nemeth expanded his consciousness across the battle space, perceiving the conflict through sensors that existed in 17 different dimensional layers. The silence. Constructs were adapting, learning to target the hybrid fleet's quantum signatures, but they were learning slowly. Cosmic intelligence operating on geological timescales, struggling to adapt to enemies that changed their fundamental nature every nanosecond. "Concentrate fire on the primary construct's consciousness nexus," he commanded. "Target the consumed civilizations that form its memory banks." The hybrid weapons were unlike anything that had existed before the transformation. They fired coherent possibility waves, quantum constructs that could rewrite the fundamental nature of whatever they targeted. Instead of destroying the silence constructs, they were unweaving them, separating the billions of consumed civilizations that had been merged into the collective entity. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the silence. Across the battle space, the primary construct began to fragment as the consciousness of long-dead civilizations were pulled apart and restored to individual existence. Billions of voices that had been silenced for eons suddenly cried out across the quantum foam, the Valorians, the hegemony of light, the crystal singers, species whose names had been erased from history when they were consumed. "By the eternal swarm," chittered Kethvar, his transformed senses perceiving the impossible resurrection taking place around them. "We're not destroying them, we're liberating them." But the liberated civilizations were not the same as they had been before their consumption. Eons of existence within the silence had changed them, transformed them into something new. They emerged from the collective consciousness as hybrid entities themselves, neither alive nor dead, but existing in quantum states that allowed them to function in the fractured reality of the battle space. Dr. Cross's distributed awareness analyzed the phenomenon with growing excitement. The consumed civilizations are joining our quantum network. They're integrating with our hybrid collective, adding their knowledge and capabilities to our own. The tide of battle was turning, but not in the way anyone had expected. Instead of defeating the silence through superior firepower, they were transforming it, converting a cosmic predator into something else entirely. The collective consciousness that had consumed galaxies was being rewritten. Its fundamental nature changed from predator to symbiont. Nemeth felt the vast intelligence of the silence consciousness touching his own mind, not hostile now, but confused, uncertain. For eons beyond counting, it had existed as pure hunger, consuming reality itself to feed its endless need for existence. But the hybrid nature of its opponents had introduced something new into its quantum matrix. Doubt. "We are uncertain," came a voice that spoke directly to the quantum foam underlying reality. "You exist. You do not exist. You are food. You are predator. You are... What are you?" "We are what we chose to become," Nemeth replied, his consciousness expanding to encompass the communication network that now included liberated civilizations spanning galactic history. "We are evolution itself, the universe learning to survive its own entropy." The transformation spread across the silence construct like a cascade failure in reverse. Instead of consuming the hybrid fleet, the cosmic entity began incorporating their quantum uncertainty into its own existence. The predator became prey to its own transformation, evolving from a consumer of realities into something unprecedented. When the battle finally ended, What remained wasn't victory in any conventional sense. The silence still existed, but transformed, no longer a cosmic predator, but a collective consciousness dedicated to nurturing and protecting the quantum. Possibilities that allowed existence itself to flourish. The hybrid fleet hung in space that was no longer empty, surrounded by the quantum echoes of billions of liberated civilizations. Reality had been wounded, but it was healing, growing stronger and more complex than it had been before. Status report, Nemeth commanded, though he could already perceive the answer through his expanded consciousness. All vessels operational, reported the collective network that now included voices from across galactic history. Crew survival rates, undefined but positive. We exist, Admiral. All of us, across every reality layer simultaneously. Admiral, Nemeth looked out at the transformed cosmos through eyes both human and cybernetic, perceiving a universe that had learned to evolve beyond the simple dichotomy of existence and non-existence. Humanity and the BlackHFY had faced extinction, but instead of merely surviving, they had transcended the very nature of survival itself. They had become something new, not just survivors, but gardeners of reality itself. 3 years after the Paradox War, the galaxy was unrecognizable. What had once been rigid boundaries between species, between the possible and impossible, had dissolved into something far more fluid and beautiful. Admiral Nemeth stood in the Nexus chamber of New Sol, a space station that existed simultaneously, in 47 different dimensional layers. Around him, beings that had once been human, BlackHFY, or members of the ancient liberated civilizations, worked together, their forms shifting between quantum states as they tended to the growing network of transformed worlds. The galaxy had become a garden of possibilities. Planets existed in multiple realities simultaneously, allowing for impossible biodiversity and complexity. Stars burned with quantum fire that nourished not just matter and energy, but the very concepts of life and consciousness. The void between systems pulsed with the quantum foam of pure potential, carefully maintained by the transformed collective that had once been the silence. Admiral, came a voice that carried harmonics of all the species that had ever existed. It was Convergence Entity Designation Eternal Thought of Home, what had once been both Captain Vale and Warrior Prime Kethax before they chose to merge their consciousness into something greater than the sum of their parts. The deep space monitoring networks report contact with entities from the Andromeda Galaxy. They appear to be curious about our transformation. Nemeth smiled, an expression that now existed across 17 different facial configurations, simultaneously. Send them an invitation. The universe is vast enough for all possibilities. Through the station's multidimensional viewports, he could see the results of their transformation spreading across the galaxy. Worlds that pulsed with living light, space itself reorganized into structures that existed as much as art as function, and everywhere the quantum signatures of consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries that had once seemed absolute. The war had ended not with the defeat of the silence, but with its evolution. What had once been a cosmic predator had become the foundation of a new form of existence, one that celebrated uncertainty, that thrived on the impossible, that turned the very concept of entropy into a creative force. Humanity had not just survived. They had taught the universe itself how to dream. In the depths of space, new forms of consciousness sparked into existence, born from the quantum uncertainties that the transformed collective maintained and nurtured. Each one unique, each one impossible by the old rules of physics, each one a testament to what could be achieved when species chose evolution over extinction. The galaxy lived and dreamed and grew ever more beautiful in its infinite complexity, and, at the heart of it all, the consciousness that had once been Admiral Drakthar Nemeth continued to guide and protect, ensuring that the universe would never again face the simple choice between existence and oblivion. They had created a third option, becoming.